There are few things in life that hold you back more than the belief that people have more influence, more impact, more power over your life than they actually do. The scary thing about this belief is that a lot of times it's hidden and we don't know we have it, or it's operating in certain areas of our lives, it's holding us back, and we don't know that belief is operating in that area of our lives. The purpose of today's Sunday school is to identify whether or not you have that belief operating somewhere in some area of your life, to dismantle it, and ultimately to set you free and the power to walk in the full authority that God has given you to be whatever it is He has called you to be victoriously in your life. For those of you who have never been here before, I would like to welcome you. My name is Shelomith. Welcome to the Detour to Destiny Sunday School. Getting right into it. Today's Sunday school comes from Proverbs 29, verses 25 and 26. I have my Bible here, so I'll read it. Proverbs 29, verses 25 and 26 says, "The fear of man brings a snare, but whoso puts his trust in the Lord shall be safe." 26 says, "Many seek the ruler's favor, but every man's judgment comes from the Lord." I'll read it one more time. Proverbs 29, verses 25 and 26 says, "The fear of man brings a snare, but whoso puts his trust in the Lord shall be safe." Many seek the ruler's favor, but every man's judgment comes from the Lord. Put my phone on do not disturb. Okay. So getting right into it, let's break down signs. I have different signs I wrote that kind of identify if the belief that people have more power over your life, if that belief is operating. So there are certain signs in the way you behave and the way you respond that are proof or evidence that you have the fear of man and is being a snare to you. The first one, so what does the fear of man look like? What are some signs to look for? The first one is lack of confidence to follow your heart. A sign that you have a fear of man. Do you have a lack of confidence to follow your heart? Breaking that down more, what does that look like? Sometimes we know that we want to pursue a certain career. Sometimes we know we want to pursue a certain hobby. Some of us have things that, you know, let's just say there's relationships we're in. We don't want to be in those relationships anymore. Another example may be you always wanted to travel to a certain place, but you're not traveling to that place. Maybe there's something courageous. People may identify you as not being the type to do something that you actually want to do. But you're afraid of following your heart because you're afraid of what they may say. You're afraid of what their opinion of you may be. You're afraid of the consequences of their opinion changing. So, a lot of times with younger people, not just younger people, but a lot of times with people who are teens, tweens, young 20s, sometimes you'll have career paths that you want to take. Maybe you want to be an artist, or maybe you want to travel the world first, or maybe you want to take time off to identify with yourself. Maybe you don't want to follow in the footsteps of whatever the family business and tradition is. Or maybe you don't want to do whatever it is your parents want you to do. You have a different dream and goal for your life. But because you fear they may cut you off, you fear they may not support you financially, you fear you may disappoint them, you fear you may let them down, or you feel as if it's your responsibility to take care of your family, that fear of man may be a snare to you because it may be stopping you from pursuing the career that's actually true to your heart. Another example may be people who are older or older couples. Let's just say, for example, if you're married to someone or you are in a relationship and you really don't want to be in that relationship anymore, or you found out that that relationship is not healthy for you. Now, what's true to your heart is to part ways. But you are afraid that if you part ways, maybe people within your church community may look at you a certain way. They may look at you as breaking the laws that God say that you're not supposed to ever get divorced. Or maybe you're afraid that because you've built up an online presence and you guys are couples goals, marriage goals, you're afraid that it's going to dismantle whatever brand you have built. Maybe you may even just be afraid that everyone told you not to marry the person. And now you don't want them to be able to say, aha, I told you so. I was right. I told you not to ever do it. There could be a list of reasons, but it ultimately comes down to you feeling as if the negative pushback you may get from people, you're giving it more power than it deserves. Because let's go down the road of the worst case scenario. Let's say you decide to end a relationship that's not working for you and you follow your heart. Let's say they do say, aha, I told you so. So what? What's the power in that? Let's say your fear is it's going to dismantle your public image or cause a breakdown of the brand, which ultimately impacts your finances. Here's the thing, when you're true to your heart, God still blesses your finances. The issue is you believe people have more influence over your finances than they do. What do I mean by that? You may think that if publicly everyone knows that you're divorced or the relationship didn't work out, that is going to impact sales and everyone's going to say you're fraud and leave. Guess what? There's an entirely different audience of people who they're looking for someone who can authentically relate to their breakup. There's an entirely different audience of people who needs to see someone go through a breakup gracefully, who needs to see someone have the courage to follow their heart and claim their life and their relationship. So just because those people are not your audience now doesn't mean they won't be your audience after you make the decision. Furthermore, ultimately, it all comes down to God providing for you in the in between seasons as you navigate new spaces. So, let's say you do go through a season where sales plummet, your following dips. It really doesn't matter when God is still providing for you, making sure you're fed, making sure you have shelter, making sure everything works out in the interim. So, people don't have the power over you that you believe they do. So that's a relationship example. Another example of not being courageous enough to follow your heart. Let's say, for example, if you want to switch careers and you have invested a lot of money, a lot of training, a lot of college tuition in a particular career, you're in the career and you don't like it. Now, to follow your heart would be maybe to go back to school, to start a business, to save up the money and to make that transition. However, when we talk about the fear of man being a snare, maybe you just don't want the backlash that your spouse or your significant other is going to impose upon you. Now, I will say there's a responsible way to do it, especially if you're the man of the household, right? So you can't just get up and say, I decide I want to do this, and then you don't have a financial plan to make that transition. And then you leave all the weight on your spouse or vice versa. Like if you guys have been managing a household where the house depends on both of your financial contribution, you have to follow your heart in a way that's responsible for the ecosystem of your home. So, what does that look like? Let's say if I'm married and both of our incomes, my husband and my income, both is necessary to keep the house afloat. One day I wake up, I work in IT. And let's just say, for example, if I were married, I said, I don't really want to do IT anymore. I always wanted to be a music artist. Me following my heart responsibly will be me having a conversation with my husband and saying, hey, I'm going to make this transition into music. So over the next 6 months, 5 months, year, or whatever it is, I'm going in my downtime, I'm going to focus more on piano lessons, voice lessons. But as I make the transition, let's come up with a financial plan so that we have enough money in savings so that it's not a strain on you when I actually cut the cord with the IT business and transition over into the music business. But I just want you to know that me as a music artist, that's coming. I'm working towards that. That's what I'm moving towards. So I want to be clear. That's the way you make a transition when you are in a household that is dependent upon two incomes. And even for yourself, you don't have to financially put yourself in a strain. You can stack up money, as we call it. You can save and make maybe you have to cut expenses, get 6 months to a year savings in place, work a second job or whatever, just to create that extra income to make that transition so that it's not super stressful for you, even if you're single like me, So I just want to put that out there. But the point is, don't stop yourself from doing what's necessary to make the transition to follow your heart. Because there could be another scenario where, even though you have financially set the plan in place to make sure it's a smooth transition, it's not going to be a financial strain on you or your partner can still not think it's a good idea and still impose their opinion upon you and say, I don't think you should do it, and I don't think it's stable, and I don't support it. What do? You still have to follow your heart. Follow your heart responsibly, but still follow your heart. What's the fear consequence? The fear consequence is, well, if I follow my heart, the person may break up with me or they may leave me. I will say this: I would rather for someone to leave me than for me to forever abandon myself. I'll say that again. It's better for someone to leave you than for you to live a life absent from yourself. Because if you're given an ultimatum where it's either they are going to leave me or I am going to leave me, I'm going to let them leave me. Just putting that out there. So, whatever those consequences may be, well, that means I have to start over on my own, or that means that, I don't have the same financial support that I used to have. That means that there may be undue stress on the household or on the children, all of those things. I would say, and this is just my personal advice, right? So I'm not trying to pass this part off as, you know, a God thing, but my personal advice to you in that situation would be to get the tools and the support system and seek out the counseling, the counselors, the therapists, the support from your spiritual community if they're not controlling, because that's a whole nother conversation. But just get the support system that you need around you so that it's a better transition for you and your children. Because ultimately, you cannot live your life being untrue to yourself, because it's going to negatively impact the children anyway. That's what children who are raised by miserable parents end up being children who have all types of emotional issues, because they can feel that you're unhappy, and the way that you interact with them affects them as well. So you may think that you're making a sacrifice by staying in an unhealthy relationship. You may think that you're making a sacrifice for the kids by living a life that's unhappy for you. The irony of it is the sacrifice ends up sacrificing the kids, because you, as an unhappy, unfulfilled, bitter, stressed parent, does not positively impact them, whether it's directly or indirectly. So it's better for you to follow your heart anyway. So those are some examples of lack of confidence to follow your heart and what that looks like. Let's move on to the next one. Another sign that you may be operating in the fear of man. Number two is compromise of what you know is right. Sometimes people compromise what they know the right thing to do, what they know to be the right thing to do, because they fear the consequences. Let's say, for example, you work in an environment where you know that they want you to forge documents. They want you to falsify documents. Now you know that Technically, you may not get caught, but it makes you feel uncomfortable. But you fear if you don't falsify the documents or you don't forge the documents that you may lose your job. That is an example of fear of man because that's an example of compromise of what you know is right because you fear the outcome of a person. Back to remembering that God is the final say so. When you do what's right, God is going to take care of you. You have to remember who is in control. So what? Let's say you do lose the job because you refuse to falsify the documents or because you refuse to forge the documents. God will take care of you in the interim. That's why verse 26 says, many seek the ruler's favor, but every man's judgment comes from the Lord. When we talk about ruler, anyone who you see as a person who has an authoritative or a managerial or a position of impact over you, a lot of times we have to be careful to not compromise what we know to be the right thing to do because we feel like someone who has an authoritative position over us may have the power to impact us financially or impact our position. Another thing when we talk about compromise of what you know is right, let's say you are actually working towards something. Let's say you want a role as an actor or an actress, and you're not comfortable with explicitly sexual content, right? That's just your comfort level. But you feel as if you don't do it, then you won't get the opportunity. That's a fear of men being able to take opportunities from you because you're disconnected from the fact that whatever God has for you will not require you to compromise what you know or feel is right. It always comes back to knowing that people don't have the power. Sometimes they have the illusion of power. Sometimes they have a temporary influence, but you have to look at the big picture and know that that temporary outcome, that's just a temporary outcome, but the bigger, all things are working together for your good. Going back to that example, compromise of what you know is right. Let's say another example may be a person wants you or you witness a person being mistreated. You witness a person being racially profiled. You may be aware that a person is being set up. Now, you want to step in and you want to speak out. You want to, when you're amongst the conversation, you want to stand up and say, hey, that's not right. You shouldn't do that. Or you want to privately report it, but you are afraid again because you are afraid it may cause tension for you, or you are afraid it may cause you to be fired, or you are afraid it may cause you to be the enemy or overlooked for the position, or whatever. That's another thing of the fear of man being a snare for you, and that's showing up in a way of you compromising what is right. Always do what's right. Always do what you feel is right. Always do what you know to be right. God rewards your righteousness. God sees everything. It may feel as if temporarily you're being punished. You're not. Anytime you're moved from one position because you do what's right, God is always elevating you to a higher position. Anytime you are removed from a position because you do what's right, trust and believe God is elevating you to a higher, better position. Also, He will take care of you in the interim and the in between. Moving on to sign number three, that you are operating in the fear of man. Sign number three is you have a fear of rejection. So you're not true to yourself. You have a fear of criticism. Kind of like what we talked about in number one, but it's slightly different. So a fear of rejection, a fear of criticism. Let's say you actually do want to sing, you do want to write, you do want to speak, you do want to act, but you're afraid that you don't sound good enough, that you're not well trained enough, you're not put together enough. Whatever your internal conversation you have with yourself is that makes you feel like you're not enough. That is the fear of rejection operating. That is the fear of man operating. And it's a snare. It's a snare because it's holding you back from what you really want to do because you don't want the criticism. Let's say you do want to change jobs. Let's say you do want to relocate. Let's say you have a different opinion than the masses. Let's say you want to speak out. Let's say you have a conversation, and a lot of, when we look at the country and the state of the country, I feel like a lot of what we're seeing with laws being passed that are totally destroying the family structure, when we look at what happened with COVID and the pressure that was put on people to take the vaccine versus people who didn't take the vaccine, the way we were pitted against each other, when we look at different legislation that is against our morals and our Christian beliefs, a lot of the laws and the legislation is being passed because as Christians, we have fear of man. We don't want to be the person in the group, in the room, at the job who says, "I'm not getting the vaccination. I don't believe in it." You don't want to be that person because you fear getting fired. But if you feel as if it's a threat to your body, that's where the fear of man becomes a snare to you, because now you're doing something that you don't even feel comfortable with, because you are disconnected from the fact that God will take care of you in the interim. A lot of times it's easy to say that we believe that until a situation comes up that requires us to exercise that. Because when your job really is on the line, all the times that you were in church shouting and running up and down the aisles and God is in control and God, you're all powerful, did you believe Him enough to not get vaccinated if you did not feel comfortable getting vaccinated? Or did you put your body at risk because you were afraid that man had the power to fire you? Which ultimately is not even about getting fired, it's what getting fired means. So at the root of it, man having the power to disrupt your well-being, man having the power to take away your provision, because it's really about provision. It's just that the job is the way we see provision. But when you strip it all away and you see that God is the provider, you know that God can provide, whether it's a job, whether it's a knock at the door you weren't expecting, whether it's food falling from the sky, whether it's, you went, there are so many ways that God can provide. When you have your eyes on Him and not on the method He's using at the time, it empowers you to know that God is in control of your well being and He will make sure you have everything you need. And that takes away the power of people being able to bully you into situations you don't want to be in. A lot of us get bullied into being silent when we're in a room and people are talking about family structure and people are talking about, what is a man and what is a woman, and just all the conversations about what our kids should be taught, what the curriculum should be, what's inclusion versus indoctrination. A lot of us have very strong opinions about that. And we're silent because we fear what the consequence will be if we speak up, because we have been brainwashed and deceived into thinking that people have more power over us than they do. Here's the thing: people have the amount of power you believe they have. I'll say that again. People have the amount of power over your life you believe they have. If you believe people have the power to disrupt, to destroy, to take away your livelihood, they do. You know why? Because you're going to bow down and do whatever it takes to not rock the boat, to stay in your position of employment, or to stay in your position of power, or whatever position you're in. You're going to bow down to them. So you have given them the power because you chose to bow down, because you believe that they can set you up in a way where you're not provided for. If you know that no matter what they do, whether they remove you from the position, whether they exile you from the group, whether they fire you, whether they demote you, it doesn't matter, because wherever you land, whether you're high or low, God never leaves you and He never forsakes you. He will always provide for you. He will always provide for you in the interim. You may not know what that looks like, but knowing that it always shows up. You serve a God who rains manna from the sky. You serve a God who can bring water from rocks, water in a desert. That's the kind of God you serve. When you're focused on that and not on the way he chooses to provide in the meantime, it gives you the power to stand up. The reason Christians are so voiceless is because we have become powerless. And the reason we have become powerless is because we have over exaggerated the amount of power other people have over our lives. We have to get back to knowing that no matter what it looks like temporarily or immediately, God never fails. He is faithful to take care of you. I want you to hold on to that, which moves seamlessly into evidence number 4, lack of courage to speak up for yourself or what you know to be right. I kind of talked about that previously. As Christians, we know what the word says. We know what's right. We know what's wrong. We know what should be pushed. We know what should be promoted. We know what should be taught to our children. You got to push back. You can't just, we can't just lay down and be in a room in a conversation and you have your teenage daughter, your teenage son, or you have your kid is sitting right there next to you. There's a whole group of people having a conversation about inclusion, about how standing up for what you believe to be the traditional family structure is hate. You have people saying that it's hate. You have people saying that it's closed minded. You have people saying that it lacks compassion. You know that's not true. But when you don't speak up because you're afraid of everyone pushing back, because you're afraid of the criticism, because you're afraid of being seen as a bigot, you're afraid of being seen as closed minded or old fashioned, whatever your fear is for not speaking up, that's a snare. It's a snare not only to you, it's a snare to your child because your child sees you silent. And silence to a child is acceptance. Silence to a child is agreement. So when you're not speaking, I'm not saying that you have to be hostile. I'm not saying that you have to be argumentative, but at least voice the truth. You can voice the truth in love and compassion. You definitely need to have a conversation with your child away from the environment for sure. But we can't just sit back and be silent and let everything just push forward because we are afraid. Christians are too afraid. And because we are too afraid, we are not vocal enough. Because we are too afraid, we are not speaking out enough. Because we are too afraid, we are not standing for what is right. We are allowing things in the church. Like, we're allowing messages that are a total disruption to how God defines the family to run rampant in church because we're afraid of being canceled. We're afraid of being called that hate teachers. You're afraid of not being a pastor anymore. You're afraid of being removed from your position. Why are you afraid of being removed from your position? Because you're afraid of the income that comes from it. Why are you afraid of the income that comes from your position in the church? Because you see the income as the provision and not God as the provision. Verse 26 again says, this is Proverbs 29:26. Many seek the ruler's favor, but every man's judgment comes from the Lord. In these church constructs, you guys have people that you answer to. There's like different hierarchies. You got bishops and all this stuff that I really don't subscribe to, but that's a whole different that's a null. That point is null and void. The point is within the church construct, you guys have hierarchy of order, hierarchy of who you answer to. And a lot of you are going against what the Spirit of God is telling you to teach, what the Spirit of God is telling you to preach, what the Spirit of God is telling you to reject, and what the Spirit of God is telling you to accept because you're trying to stay in good favor with the leadership in your church. But Proverbs 29:26 says, many seek the ruler's favor, but every man's judgment comes from the Lord. That verse is saying a lot of people are doing whatever it takes to be in good favor with their ruler, but don't forget the judgment comes from God. So, whatever God is putting on your heart to be right, to be wrong, to be acceptable, to be unacceptable, you better stand on that. You better walk boldly in that. If it happens, it better not be because you approved it. If something that you feel is not right goes forward under your leadership, it better not be because you approved of it and God is convicting your heart about it because you're afraid of what man and people will do to you. You better remember that God is the one who has the final say so over what happens to you, and he never leaves you, he never forsakes you. You will be well taken care of. You better stand on business, as they say. Moving on to number 5, which I already talked about, which is feeling pressure to do things you don't want to do. We just talked about that. Do you find yourself in a position where you're doing things you really don't want to do? Do you find yourself subjecting yourself to things you really don't want to do? It can be something as simple as you don't want to host a party at your house. It don't really even have to be all that deep. It can be like you really don't want to go to a party, but because, you know, they came to your party last time, you feel obligated to come to their party this time, and you don't want the friendship to be frayed. You don't want them to feel like you're not being supportive, so you don't go even though you don't feel like it. It can be that simple because you're still fearing the backlash of them not liking you or them not liking your decision. It's not always these big grand things, but the things that you exercise in small situations, they carry over to bigger situations. So where the word of God says, when you're faithful over a little, he makes you, he blesses you with more, or you're faithful over more. You have the opportunity to be faithful over more. When you're faithful over the little decisions to be true to yourself, you're given the grace to be true to yourself in bigger situations because you're exercising that muscle. It's like when you go to the gym and you start off with, maybe you bench press 25 pounds. If you keep being faithful and bench pressing at 25 pounds, that muscle is going to build up. And before you know it, the 25 is easy. Now you're moving up to 35. Now you're moving up to 50, 75, 125, 200, 225. Like when you consistently exercise a muscle, whatever muscle you're exercising on that level becomes easy and you step up. Same thing with being true to yourself. Same thing with resisting the pressure to do things you don't want to do. Being able to say, I'm not taking the vaccine if you don't agree with it. Being able to say, I don't agree with this legislation. Being able to say, no, I don't agree with how you're trying to redefine family. Being able to say, no, this is not something we can allow in the church. Being able to say, no, this is not a lifestyle that we accept. Being able to say that, it starts off with being able to say, "Yeah, I really don't feel like going to the party." They seem disconnected, but it's that muscle. You can't jump to the 200-pound and you haven't been exercising the 5-pound situations. It starts off with saying, "No, I really don't feel comfortable with you borrowing my car. No, I don't think I'm gonna host the event this year." That's the 5-pound, you know, that the 5-pound situations that build you up for the 200-pound situations. So ultimately, everything that I'm talking about, right? So those situations, do you find yourself in a position where you have lack of confidence to follow your heart? Do you find yourself in situations where you compromise what you know is right because you're afraid of the consequences? Do you ever find yourself not doing what you really want to do because you fear rejection or you fear criticism? Are you shy or do you just fear criticism? Are you shy or do you fear rejection? Do you ever find yourself lacking the courage to speak up for yourself or to speak up for what you believe is true? Do you ever find yourself in situations where you're being pressured to do things you really don't want to do? If you are seeing any of these 5 signs operate in your life, it's evidence that the fear of man, the fear of people is operating as a snare to you. Break free. The way you break free is this: no matter what, God has the final say so. No matter what people do, no matter what position you are removed from, no matter what job you are fired from, no matter how many people cancel you, no matter, it doesn't matter what the criticism is, it doesn't matter what label they put on you. When God is for you, no one can successfully be against you. When God is for you, being fired will never be your downfall. It will be your transition to a better position. When God is for you, removal from a position, whether it's clergy, whether it's church, whether it's a boss, whether it's a manager, when God is for you, removal from that position, all it does is transition you into a position where you can be true to yourself. When being true to yourself, it doesn't matter if the breakup, the divorce, the end of the friendship, whatever those consequences are, when God is for you, the ultimate outcome of that, on the other side of the criticism, on the other side of the backlash, is you actually finding a person who is better fitted for you. This is how you walk in freedom. I need you to take your eyes off of the way God chooses to provide and see God as a provider. So, what I'm saying is, even though God may have chosen to provide for you through a job in this season, He may choose to do it another way in the next season. So, never get so attached to the way God provides that you forget that it's Him doing all the provision, because the way he provides is going to change, it's going to shift, it's going to be different as you go throughout life. One season he's providing through a job, the next season he's providing through your business working, the next season he's providing through someone just finds it on their heart to provide for you or to give you money or to bless you. Another season he provides for you by something miraculous happens, and you know, something shows up on your doorstep that you wasn't expecting. Another season he provides for you by taking away the expenses altogether. The provision is shape shifts. It's always changing. When you understand, when you see God and you see his hand and you see the things that he gives to you constantly changing, you can let stuff go. Because when you have the power to let stuff go, because you see God as the provider, it takes away people's power over your life. The amount of fear you have of the consequences of what people do. So, the amount of fear that you have in terms of the consequences of what will happen if somebody do whatever, that is a direct reflection of how much you have forgotten God is in control. So if it was an equation, you know how they say like the left side of the equation equals the right side of the equation. So if we were looking at an equation, the equation would say this. The left side of the equation would say the amount of fear you have over what people do, that's the left side of the equation. And then you have an equal sign. And then the right side of the equation would say it equals the amount you have forgotten God is in control. So when you 100, so if you 40% believe people are in control, you got 40% fear, 60% trust. If you 60% believe that people are in control, you got 60% fear and only 40% trust. And it's going to show up in your actions. And you can take it moment by moment. So when you're looking at a situation that you're faced with, are you choosing in that moment to do what's true to you? what you feel is right, what's in your heart. Take it decision by decision. For every decision that comes up, ask yourself, is this what I really feel I want to do? Am I being true to myself? Is this what I believe is right? Do I want to speak up? Ask yourself that question. If you exercise the boldness to follow your heart, to be what's true in you, in that moment, in that situation, you are 100% conscious of and aware of the fact that God is in control. In that moment, if you pull back and you don't follow your heart, you don't do what's best for you, you don't do what you believe is right, in that moment, you have forgotten that God is in control and makes everything work together for your good. In that moment, you're not believing that. So, to end this off, I just want to encourage you, remember that God is in control. Remember that all things work together for your good. Remember that no matter what the temporary situation is, God is providing for you and making all things work together for your good in the interim, and He is transitioning you into a better place, position, relationship, whatever it is. Ending again on Proverbs 29, verses 25 and 26. It says, the fear of man brings a snare, but whoso put his trust in the Lord shall be safe. You're safe. You're safe. Many seek the ruler's favor, but every man's judgment comes from the Lord. Hold on to that. Read that over and over and over again throughout the week. And I want to pray for you and end out. Lord God, we thank you so much for your word. We thank you for your guidance. We thank you for how you empower us to remember that you are in control. We thank you that you are in control of every detail of our lives. We thank you that you promise that all things work together for our good. We thank you, O Lord God, that you tell us that even though we may fall, we are not utterly cast down. We thank you for making our enemies our footstool. We thank you that no weapon formed against us ever has or ever will prosper. We thank you that we can walk boldly, knowing that your hand and your favor is upon us. And no matter what happens, you are always providing for us. You are always giving us what we need when we need it. And we don't have to compromise because you love us and you have the final say so. We pray that we hold on to this, that we walk boldly in this truth, that we be true to where you are guiding us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I love you so much. Have an awesome week, and I will see you next Sunday. Remember, stay true to yourself, follow your heart, do what you know is right, speak up for yourself, knowing that God is in control and making it all work together for your good. Love you so much. Be blessed.